Welcome to the presentation today on some first week activities and acclimating students to online courses. So I'm Nate Gordon. I've been teaching here since 2002, online classes and campus classes, and I taught hybrid classes and enhanced classes for a while before that. A number of years ago I took a sabbatical to start and then ultimately complete a certificate program through University of Illinois Springfield and the Illinois Online Network, and that was for online learning. So part of what I'm talking about today is a bit of what was gleaned through that and a bit in terms of my overall experiences with online classes and really getting students engaged in the first week. So before I jump into the presentation, I thought it would be helpful just to hear a little bit from folks in the audience, just in terms of how long have you been teaching online for a while, or are you not teaching online yet? And if you have been teaching online, how do you feel about student engagement? Do you feel like it's a struggle? Do you feel like students are typically pretty involved? Jody? I don't want to speak for you, although I know I've talked with you a bit about online classes since we're in the same alcove.
I have been teaching online for a very long time, probably since the inception of it here at the college, and I am currently teaching 3 different courses online in a variety of formats, 4-week, 8-week, and 16-week formats, and I find the more engaged I am, the more engaged my students are.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Online courses since I started as an adjunct, and that was 4 years ago. And the majority of mine are hybrid, so that online component is definitely necessary. I think there is one course that I don't necessarily use D2L extensively. The rest I do.
Okay. So for your hybrid courses, do you meet with students before they do online components?
We meet the first day,
Okay.
and then periodically through the semester for some of them. And sometimes I'm there for the entire semester just as a backup.
Sure.
So we have the time frame, but whether they choose to be there or not is their choice.
Okay. Well, I wanted to start by taking a look at something that maybe some of us would know a little bit about, and maybe not. I've titled this First Week Activities for Student Retention, a roundtable discussion, simply because I think this is going to be pretty informal. This is not an incredibly formal presentation on my part, but I thought that I would put a DirecTV remote up here for us, and thought that we would think a little bit about what some of the buttons do, if we know what they do, and kind of use that as the gateway to thinking about acclimating to an online course. So first of all, is anyone too familiar with the DirecTV remote? Do we know what the green button does, for example? Green button right here.
Don't have DirecTV.
Don't have DirecTV. Okay. Let's see, what else do we got?
For go.
Yeah, green is for go, right? There's an active button right here. There's a power button right here. Any guesses at what those might do? Turn it on, perhaps for the power button, right? So that maybe seems a little self-explanatory. But some of the other ones, if we're just handed this, if we don't have DirecTV, if we're not familiar with how the remote is set up, then we probably won't know our way around very well, at least at the start, right? Okay, so we'll kind of come back to that in a little bit here. I wanted to talk a little bit about how students then acclimate to online education. And I would say that for my teaching philosophy and my teaching purposes, I'm pretty much a constructivist. So I think that students and people in general learn by doing. So my first job, I was a lifeguard, and part of that was teaching swim lessons. And students definitely learn by doing, right? You have to get in and you have to swim. Later in my early 20s, I spent my summers as an assistant rock climbing guide, and you can do so much ground school, but eventually people need to go rock climbing, right? And you need to learn by doing. And so students need to learn by doing. For me, since I teach in the English department, they need to learn writing through writing. But as instructors, I think we also learn by doing as well. So I think I come at this in a pretty practical way, as opposed to having a lot of qualitative data, things to look at. So I thought, in the purpose of our fairly informal discussion here, I would talk a little bit about how students acclimate to the course. So hearsay. So my friend told me all of these different things about online courses, right? That they're harder, or that they're easier, or that they're just not quite for everyone. Those may or may not be true, I suppose, to different degrees. They might acclimate through some acquired knowledge. So they might have had an online class before, they might have had a hybrid class before, they might have been in a campus class in which they used a little bit of online technology. And so they might come to your specific class and they might say, well, I had this other class, but we just read a chapter a week, or we just took a quiz every week, or even worse, we just had a bunch of assignments and they were all just due at the end, right? So they will have some other experiences with online classes already, perhaps, and then some general assumptions. Well, I just figured I have a phone, phone's connected to the internet, I can just do an online class on my phone. I can take an English class on the phone, right? I can write all of my papers on the phone. Or that maybe because it's online, maybe we wouldn't write as much. Or maybe because it's online, we didn't need any kind of a book, either electronic or physical, right? So some different hearsay, some different knowledge, and some different assumptions. So everyone comes into an online class with a different gauge here. And I would say of all of these that are listed up here, the statement of online classes are not for everyone, that may or may not be true. And that's probably the most truthful of the hearsay knowledge and assumptions up here. Because everyone has obviously some different learning styles, and an online class might be a good option for that student, but maybe not for a specific subject. So from my own experience, I didn't have online classes when I was in college, but we had night classes, and I was not great at math. I needed math every day. I was pretty good at math in high school, but my first semester I took a math night class, which was a very bad decision for me. So I ended up, that's the only class I ever had to withdraw from and take it again. And it was because, not that I was that terrible at math, but what I needed was a little different than a night class. And so when students come to online classes, they often come with that bit of caveat as well too, that online learning might work for them, but it might be a little tricky depending on the specific subject. So I thought we would go ahead and label the remote. I didn't want to just leave that hanging out there. So if we are acclimated then, so if we have DirecTV and we sort of understand the remote and how it works, again, the power button is pretty self-explanatory. The active button does things that don't sound particularly active to me. They bring up the weather, they bring up lottery information. That button brings up all sorts of interesting things that I personally never use. And the green button cycles ahead 12 hours. So someone said green for go, right? And so kind of, green is kind of for go. It jumps ahead in the DirecTV menu. So just like we would need to acclimate ourselves to a new piece of technology, if we just get DirecTV and we're just handed this remote and we don't know what to do with it, students also need to be acclimated to their classes, not just if it's the first time taking their class, but to your specific class, because again, they'll come to you maybe having taken another online class, but they function very differently. For my course, for acclimating students, I typically think I've got my pre-first week, my actual first week, and then what we immediately lead into, so the post-first week here. For me, I follow the ADDIE process of instructional design. There are lots of instructional design philosophies. This is one that tends to work for me fairly well. I'll make it a bit bigger here for us. So analysis, so what do you as the instructor want students to know? Design, what do the students actually need to do? What do they need to complete? the development on my end. So what do I need to do as the instructor? What do I need to create for my students? The implementation, actually putting it into practice, kind of the first run, I suppose. And then the evaluation, doing some kind of revising, doing some kind of assessment on my end. So, I ran this. This is what happened. How did it work? Do I need to ask any questions at this level? Does it need to be revised? The ADDIE model, even though I've presented it there, is typically stylized as a cycle, in that it is somewhat perpetual, in that we are sort of continually going through the ADDIE process. And so if I have an assignment that I've put into practice and I've implemented it and I evaluate it and I say, okay, it worked pretty well or it worked not very well at all, and I need to tweak it or I need to maybe completely overhaul it, then okay, then maybe back to the analysis stage and keep cycling through. So for me, when I think of the first week, I think of this as having a couple different applications. So the global level, I would say, and the local level. So for me, the global level is going to be the course overall. The local level will be things like those specific assignments. So when I think of my course, and again, I'm specifically thinking, for me, I'm thinking English 103 and 104. And I teach some other online courses, but that's specifically what I'm thinking of for this. So I think, what do I want my students to get out of the first week? Because when I first started teaching online, it was a little more complicated, I think, for me to engage with students and to really get them into the course. And so I think, what do I want from students? I want them to jump into it. I want them to do stuff right away. I want them to have a pretty low stress state, I suppose. It's a good way to say it. So low stress. I want them to be engaged. I want them to practice the kinds of things that they will be doing throughout the semester. So for me, we do a lot of discussion. We do what I call labs, which are smaller assignments, process assignments for essays. And then we do the major essays. So when I think of D2L and I think of how it's structured, I think, okay, discussions and the assignments tab for handing things in. So I want students to be engaged. So discussions sounds like a good thing for that. I want it to be low stress at the beginning, so I'll probably have very few points attached to these things, and I want them to practice. So we'll do some practice with the discussion board, we'll do some practice with submitting assignments as well, because I don't want the first time my students submit an assignment, I don't want it to be a 50-point essay, right? Because then we start getting all of the, oh, I waited too long, right, and something happened, and then it kind of, sort of snowballs from there. So I want to set all of this up in a fairly low stress, sort of low cost, I suppose, environment. So what do I do to accomplish that then? So I have a couple things. One, pre-first week here is a welcome letter that I send out. And I've talked to a lot of online instructors, and a lot of folks do this. And I would say at different times. So some people like to send them out a week or two before the class starts. I tend to send it out pretty much over the weekend. I like to wait until all of, or at least most, kind of the add drop stuff right before a class starts. I like to wait for all of that to kind of settle down. So I typically send that out on Friday, right before classes start. And it details a little bit about who I am, just as I introduced myself today, a little bit about what they can expect out of the class, how they can log in if they've never logged in before. All of that with links in there just to kind of welcome them and to set them at ease, and in some cases to remind them, because sometimes students forget that they've taken an online class, especially if they take maybe a second 8-week class that starts halfway through the semester. it just sort of slips their mind that they signed up for a second 8-week online class. And so this welcome letter through their college email helps to establish that. I also have a welcome message on my homepage during the first week. I have the current module schedule on the homepage, so I use modules as opposed to a weekly structure. So for my classes, we work through 6 modules. So the first module is already posted. Instructions on the homepage, where to go first, to see the syllabus, etc. And then my first module includes a number of things that are designed to get students acclimated to the course. So, KISH email and phone guidelines. I don't even know if everybody knows that we have these, but I include those so that students know how to appropriately email not only myself, but email other instructors and not just send a blank message with something attached, but to actually include some information. An MLA example document for our first lab, so that's our first bit of practice to submit something. Some primary lecture material into the course basics, and then a couple discussions to help us get engaged. So particularly discussion 1 that says introductions, that's largely designed to get students kind of engaged into the course to introduce themselves, just as I've already introduced myself in the welcome letter. And then our second discussion in our first module is a content discussion as well. So that gets us into some of the Englishy material, I suppose. On the global side here, I would also put quiz, and I would put a question mark behind it. Why do you think I might not have students do any kind of a quiz early on in the first week?
They haven't done anything yet.
They haven't done anything yet, but it also doesn't fit anything that I'm doing in my course, right? So I noted that I do a lot of discussion, smaller assignments, and essays. So for my writing courses, I don't really do quizzes. So something like having the students complete a low point, low stress quiz, like a syllabus quiz, would be a very good idea for courses that rely heavily on quizzes, so that when students get to that first big quiz or first big test, they've already gone through the process and they know how to do it. So for me, for something like English 103, it doesn't make a lot of sense that I would do this specifically for my class, but certainly for the kinds of classes that you're teaching, you might do that. So this gives me an idea of what I want at the global level, how I want students to be engaged. I want them to jump right in. I've got due dates. I want them to actively start doing stuff, start doing some discussions, and then that sets them up nicely for the whole class. So when I think about this ADDIE process then, so that's part of what I'm thinking about, right? What do I want students to know at the analysis stage? Well, in my first module, I want them to know how to negotiate the course and the kinds of things that they're doing. So I work through my ADDIE model here in order to put my module 1 together. But I can also apply it then at the local level. So when I get to the point where I'm actually writing my discussion prompts, right? I'm actually writing my first lab assignment. So for us, it's this MLA kind of test file assignment. Then I'm working through this as well to think, okay, so then specifically at the assignment level, what do I want my students to get out of it? And I'm not going to fill this side in. I think that's pretty content specific for what everybody is doing, but I think the global side for us is probably a little more pressing. So for us, since we are doing this MLA test file, students will hand in all of their work in MLA format. So that's the first thing that they submit to me is a basic MLA file document so that I know that they can set it up. And then they can use that as a template for the rest of the course. And so again, that helps to set them up for the rest of the course basics. I think the last section here that I would have for us today is to think about some of the benefits. And just as I broke that part down into a couple columns, I would break the benefits down into a couple columns as well. So on the student side, then on the me side as well, because it's always nice to have some benefits to me, particularly when I'm putting these courses together. So for students, what do you think, just a couple ideas, what do you think they get out of this stuff?
Practice and repetition.
Okay.
Reassurance that they know what they're doing and it's
Okay, good, yeah. So practice, repetition, reassurance, confidence that they know what they're doing, especially given the fact that all of these things for me, they're like 3 points or something. Really very small, again, low stress, low stakes. And so it allows them to have some confidence, to have some practice, to set them up for success later. I would also say that it gets them nice and involved, particularly since for my first week and my first module, I'm having them do 2 discussions, a basic introduction, which is pretty low key, and then the content discussion as well. Because I don't know if you've noticed, and you probably have, if you have a class that starts with very little participation on the discussion board, it never really picks up, right? Jody?
How much feedback do you give on the initial discussions, and then do you kind of wean yourself out as the semester goes along the way?
Sure. I have found that if I jump in right away, it's a thread killer, right? Because the instructor has jumped in and has said something, and then that pretty much kills the discussion, right? So I tend to try to wait a bit. On the introduction discussion, I don't do anything. I let them introduce themselves, and that's it. On the content discussion, I wait until we're a bit further along. Most of my content discussions in the class happen in 2 parts. There's an initial post due date, so that's the due date by when students need to respond to whatever the discussion prompt is. And then I have a response due date, which is several days later, if I'm teaching an 8-week or 16-week class, obviously it varies, in which they then need to respond to their peers. So it's set up in 2 parts. So I like to wait more until the end because I don't want to stop any discussion that is happening. And then I often post a kind of wrap-up post of the discussion of things that I'm seeing where we can move on from there. So that's my engagement. Right. So it gets them involved, it gets them discussing right away, it gets them posting right away, because again, if they don't start, it typically doesn't increase throughout the course. Typically it decreases a little bit, right, as classes sometimes do. And so I want that threshold to be pretty high at the beginning. How about on the instructor side? Anything that you think you would gain from this kind of a setup?
well, they can't come back later and say they didn't understand.
Okay, they can't come back later and say that that they didn't understand. Okay, so maybe some clarity. Maybe I benefit from having the clarity already out there, so that I can point back and I can say, well, all of these due dates were all up on the homepage at the beginning, and you had instructions in 2 or 3 different places. So maybe my clarity certainly helps them to a degree.
You can see the competence of your students by who can figure it out and get it to you quickly and who struggles.
Yes, yeah, this is the big one, right? That I can find any kind of problems or any problem areas very quickly. So if I see that a student is posting a discussion and it's not following what I've asked for, I know that student didn't follow the instructions, right? And didn't figure out where to go for the discussion prompt. Or my test file that comes in, I have a whole rubric of what students need to do. If it comes in incomplete, or if it comes in just blank, or blank but it just says test file on it, then I know that the student didn't actually go to the assignment and see what was needed. And so this allows me to identify very early on, again, in a nice low stress kind of environment, what some students might be missing out on, and then I can directly email those students and say, hey, thanks for submitting your test file. However, it's incomplete. I just wanted to make sure that you know where to go find it, right? And so all of that gets figured out very early on, and that's very nice for me. And overall, just efficiency, I would say, is another thing. I've looked a lot into some studies on how much time online instructors spend teaching, and the estimates vary wildly, all the way up to 500% more time teaching than campus instructors. And I wouldn't say that it goes that far for me, but I can definitely see that in a lot of ways there is more time spent teaching online classes. And so I think this provides a lot of efficiency for me, because then it cuts down on the initial questions, the clarity certainly helps, and we can jump in a smear. I don't have to spend even more time addressing some of those, just maybe the one or two specific problem areas as we move throughout the course. So that's the way I set up my first week. So I've got my pre-first week, I have my actual first week of what we're doing to set up where we're going and how I want students to interact with the course. And then the post-first week, the last category that I have up there, for me, we move right into, in my English 103 class, a reflection essay in which students reflect on their prior experiences. So part of that comes out of introducing themselves, because I asked them to talk a little bit about other English classes they've taken, if they've taken online classes before. So I've already had them start thinking very lightly and very informally about their experience with education, so that when we jump into the first essay, they've already put some thoughts together, they've already maybe responded to some students on those issues, so that then they can fully put that essay together as we move out of that first week and into the second module. So that's what I have for you today. It works very well for me. I hope following this kind of a model can work for you. Again, I really like this ADDIE model. There are lots of instructional design models that people can follow, but this one just tends to work well for me. So I thought I would wrap up then my talk portion here, since I wanted to be a little more informal and have a little one-on-one time if we needed it, and we could turn the camera off. And then if there are any specific questions, I know Tim has an instructional design background certainly as well, so it's good that he's here too, that we can maybe talk about what you do in your first weeks if you want, and we can talk about maybe some things that you could do in order to acclimate your students pretty well.